Flighter jets! Someone had to tell my kids that they live in a bad neighborhood. In 2006, when we moved into the neighborhood, we had neighbors to the north and to the south of us. Great neighbors can make or break your experience in the inner city. We were lucky enough to have had some great neighbors, particularly Miss Virginia Williams. Miss Williams passed away in 2023. I do not like going to funerals. Not that anyone really does, but I would have been a fool to miss this one. As a part of the ceremony, I watched person after person get up and tell the crowd how much she meant to them. They spoke in fond remembrance of her sitting on her porch, drinking a Pepsi, and how they were compelled to stop by and say hello. I couldn't drive down 8th Street without stopping at Grandma Jean's. They told stories of her taking them in when they needed a place to stay, and how while she may have been their aunt or great aunt or even some other distant relative, she felt like a mom or a grandmother to them. Meg and I were lucky enough to share that sentiment. Miss Williams taught Meg to garden. Being a prominent member of the organization We Got This, Meg is frequently asked how she got into gardening. Each time she references Miss Williams as the person who taught her how to garden. Miss Williams gardened in her backyard for over 50 years. She was a beautiful person. There was rarely a week that passed where her and I didn't have a conversation. I was lucky to have known her. Leading up to the summer of 2020, our conversations reminded me of the conversations I would have with old Robert. It was becoming obvious that she was physically the same person, but mentally she was changing. A few years prior, we pulled up to the house after a vacation to a crowd on her front porch. Her son, who was living in the downstairs of the house, had passed away unexpectedly. Eventually, it was inappropriate for her to live alone, and she moved to an assisted living facility. Some of the people that spoke during her funeral thought about buying her house, but the scope of work to update the property was too much, and her granddaughter asked if we were interested in buying it. She was significantly upside down. She owed more than the property was worth, and we worked out a deal with the bank that owned the house and signed the papers in the fall of 2021. Milwaukee, like a lot of other big cities, has an air show. During the days leading up to the air show over the weekend, the planes perform their practice routines. We live close enough to the lake that the planes practicing fly right over our house. We Got This requires a lot of stuff, and we needed a place to store it. The easy solution was to use Miss Williams' garage, but like many garages in the neighborhood, it needed some work. In the summer of 2023, the roof of the garage was on the repair-replace list, and I found myself tearing off the old roof, repairing the rotten sheathing, which is the plywood part over the roof under the shingles, and putting a new roof on the building as the planes flew over practicing for the air show. Several fighter jets and Blue Angels flew over me while I shingled the garage. That reminds me, someone has to tell us all the things we know and point out some of the things we might not. We were married for a couple of years before I realized Meg didn't know what we call those planes that were flying over me that day. One day, when the kids were little, she asked one of them if they could hear the flighter jets outside. My first thought was, what the fuck is a flighter jet? But you can't say that in front of the kids. I forgot about it until the next time she referenced really fast airplanes. Eventually, I couldn't not ask her what she was talking about. The flighter jets, you know, the jets that fly? You mean fighter jets? Wait, what? Yeah, they're called fighter jets. What did you think they were called? Flighter jets? I've got this app that reminds me that I'm going to die. I heard somewhere that the more we can come to terms with the fact that we are going to die someday, the more fully we live when we are alive. It sends a notification to my phone randomly, like every 2 hours or something like that. A couple of times a day, I think I'm getting a text message. When I look at my watch or my phone, I see a notification from the app WeCroak that says, "Don't forget, you're going to die." I've had that app installed in my phone for years, and I still forget sometimes that I'll be done someday. I don't actually believe Wee Croak knows to send me a notification when my mind starts to wander or perseverate on the meaningless details of life. But it seems like as soon as I start to focus on something trivial or get mad about something stupid, I get a notification. There are few things more guaranteed than our eventual end. What's the saying? The only thing guaranteed in this life is death and taxes. Something happened before I installed that app that made death more real for me. It was one of the first times the end of my life was a real possibility, and I had to learn how to exist with that knowledge because it was new to me. That experience taught me the obvious lesson that death was inevitable, and it could happen at any point. It stands to reason, at least in my mind, that we learn everything, even the most basic lessons, like we're going to die someday, or that super fast airplanes are called fighter jets. Meg was driving the kids back to the house one day a few years ago. They drove past police tape, and she explained that it looked like someone had been shot there. The kids asked if it was a bad neighborhood and not a good neighborhood like ours. Having kids grow up in the inner city is particularly fascinating to me. When you grow up, you assume everything around you is normal until you learn that it isn't. Some distant relative of Meg's is from Sweden or Norway or somewhere else over there. Wherever they're from, they call their armpits oxters. She grew up assuming everyone called their armpits oxters. The first time she said oxter to me, I had no idea what she was talking about. When I work in schools, some of the kids assume that if someone hits them, they should hit them back, and if they do hit the kid, they won't get in trouble. They were taught that they should defend themselves, and defending yourselves makes hitting okay. The things that are normal to us are normal because they are normal for the people we grow up around. I've had to learn how to explain to our kids that the things they see in the neighborhood aren't normal everywhere else. In fact, a lot of what they see isn't normal for a lot of other places. If we didn't tell them those things, the world would help them figure it out eventually. When they go to college, they won't live in a neighborhood with shootings, trash, and rundown buildings. Some of their friends don't live in places like that, and they've since learned that their friends can freely wander around their neighborhoods. I know they will learn those things because they'll easily have access to spaces that do not have the problems found in our space. We had to tell the kids that some people think our neighborhood is bad. But how do you know something is good or bad? That's a question I wonder about. A lot of life is relative. I renovate houses, and when you do that kind of work regularly, having a truck is helpful. 6 years ago, we were driving across the country with our pop-up trailer. I think we were going to Glacier National Park with a stop maybe in Yellowstone, on our way to a fish concert in Washington State. At the time, we pulled the trailer with our Subaru Forester, which worked fine, but wasn't the type of car that should be pulling a trailer through the mountains across the country, so we bought a truck. It was about as little truck as we could buy that fit all of us and would easily pull a trailer. Maybe some of you have similar thoughts about the future. Someday I'll do this thing I always wanted to, or get this thing that would make my life easier. Being able to drive the kids to school with a load headed to the dump, or having the ability to pick them up from school and swing by Home Depot on the way home, was a big upgrade for me at the time. The campground host at the place we stayed at just outside of Glacier told us about the bears. Apparently a grizzly bear lived in or around the campground and liked to meander through the campsites at night. Because the sides of the pop-up are fabric, he told us we would need to keep everything that smelled like anything or would be remotely interesting for a bear to check out inside of a bear box or in the truck. I remember thinking having a truck was the coolest thing in the world. I was able to drive the family halfway across the country with an eventual stop at the gorge for 3 nights of fish, and I could put all of the food from the trailer in the truck so a bear couldn't eat it. Now that truck sits on a parking slab at the White House on the corner, and we have a new truck. The transmission started slipping, and we were able to drive the other direction across the country to go to a fish show in Atlantic City. And we wanted something more reliable. I remember thinking having a new, in quotes, truck that was only 11 years old was the coolest thing in the world. It's all relative. There was a part of the world that would find my neighborhood something to aspire toward. Few of those places exist within the United States, but the people there would see the quality of life here and wish they had what myself and my neighbors have. I've noticed that you have to tell kids most things. I've also noticed you have to tell adults most things. All the stuff that we know or believe, we were told or watched happen. Most of us were told that the world was like a ball, but some people were told that the world wasn't that way. And they will argue endlessly that the world is in fact flat. All this rambling about fighter jets and fish shows has a point. We don't know something is good or bad unless someone tells us or shows us that there is something better out there. My kids had no idea they lived in what most of the United States would classify as a bad neighborhood. Someone, Meg and I, had to tell them that, which makes me wonder if we have it wrong. Maybe we live in a good neighborhood. Maybe we all have it wrong. I've thought that way for a while. That's why this collection of episodes attempts to be a truthful description of the conditions here, but also highlights the good that takes place in our neighborhood. Someday, I think we should get to the point where no child has to grow up in a bad neighborhood. To do that, we can do two things: improve the living conditions in neighborhoods like mine, and rewrite the narrative. Tell a different story around those places. If my kids think they live in the best neighborhood, maybe they're right. Maybe we all had it wrong. Maybe all we need to do is believe that it's good.